I don't know if anybody's who's been joining us a lot noticed anything different about me, but I do, forget about groundhogs and things like that. When I shave, that means we are in spring. It is officially spring when I shave. So I was telling staff this morning that usually I shave on a, weekend so I can enjoy, being half shaven. So my wife's out of town, so I'm going to let y'all choose. Y'all get to choose what exactly how I should, if I grow anything back, how I should grow it. You go for the full beard, the you know evil twin goatee. Kind of, you see I'm smiling there. I kind of like I don't know what you call it, the Harley look. Or I've been watching a show that takes place in San Francisco in the 1800s. There's a lot of nice handlebar mustaches. So I'm kind of thinking, I don't that might be a good look. Y'all can vote in the chat, and I'll tell my wife she doesn't have any say in it. Welcome y'all to another midweek program. This is always fun. Get to see a lot of friends in our participants. And we have a big plant sale this year, and it's easy to overlook some of the things that are in there. So this is just a chance to kind of talk about some of the plants that we have that you may have overlooked or not know much about. I'm going to be talking about, plants in general. So whether you're here locally and can participate in our plant sale, great. If you're farther away and can't, still hopefully we'll get you some great information. So some of this I have put into lists, and I'm going to have those on slides like this, and you don't need to read it all. I have supplied Chris and Arlene with PDFs of this, and they can put it in the chat perhaps, or you can email with Chris and he can send you any of these lists that you want. And none of these lists are comprehensive at all. They're just some things that I put together really quick to talk about, mostly with things that are still in the sale. And I started with deer resistant because it's something that we always get asked about. Any fern, the asplenium here, that's a hart's tongue fern. We have a couple ferns left, and those are always deer resistant, as are any kind of ornamental grasses. Those you can just don't have to worry about. A few other things like this Artemisia. This is not one that I know, but I know it has fragrant foliage. Most things with fragrant foliage, herby, minty foliage, and I'm rubbing on another plant over here and sniffing it, a mint that I'll talk about in a bit. But any of these herby type plants tend to be pretty resistant. And peonies, for something so delicate looking, peonies are really quite deer resistant. A lot of things fall into that. They're tolerant of deers, generally don't eat them, but they might possibly. One that I'll talk about maybe a little bit later is this Japanese mint, Camanthus face japonica. But dianthus are one that I love. I have a lot of deer around me, and I use a lot of dianthus. It's so great for kind of the front edges of garden beds, things like that. It's really beautiful. And geraniums. I'm absolute geranium nut. The perennial geraniums I just love. I think a lot of those perennial geraniums need a little more shade for us than they do in some other areas. And I think sometimes people fail by just baking some of them when they could use a little protection from the afternoon sun. But there are so many gorgeous ones in our sale. Geranium, dragonheart, crystal rose, the Cantabrigense types are really reliable ones. This is one called Pink Delight, and they, the perennial geraniums tend to be whites to pinks to lavendery purples to blues in some cases. So those are really nice plants, and I'll show you some of those towards the end as well. Some actually in pots that we have here that are actually part of the sale, but they grow quite differently. You always have to pay attention to growth habit on these. The Cantabrigense types tend to be lower, spreading, almost ground covery type plants. They often get very good fall color as well for a herbaceous perennial and will often be somewhat evergreen for us. But then others have longer stems and they kind of ramble around through other perennials, around shrubs. Some of them will clamber up into the shrubs. The dragon heart is one that's a little more like that, where it'll sprawl through. Like I said, most of these prefer a little bit of shade from the harshest afternoon sun, but there's one that we have, name's going to escape me right now, geranium Margaret Wilson, that definitely is a shade plant. And I'll show you that because it's a nice variegated one. Peonies, another one that are really fairly deer resistant or very deer resistant. And I just had to put this picture in. This plant is not in the sale. This is a picture I took this morning of Peonia Lascovicii, and then Molly the Witch, growing in my garden at home. And hopefully y'all will appreciate it because my daughter and my wife don't appreciate it nearly as much as they should. But we do have great peonies, and perhaps one of the most important plants that's hit the market in the last decade has been the hybrid peonies. These are the Ito peonies. These are hybrids between the herbaceous peonies and the tree peonies. And they combine the best characteristics of both. They don't flop at all. They have big, gorgeous flowers, but you cut them back in the winter, and every year they just get bigger and fuller and more beautiful. These are two of them. These are not, neither of these are in the sale. So I only put the names down when it is a plant in the sale. And it's funny, we had one Ito peony that sold out almost immediately, and then another one that I don't know that any have sold. And that's this one, Scrumdiddlyumptious, which may be why it hadn't sold out, because it's a ridiculous name. But it is such a good plant. Now, I'll warn you, it's a new one, and the new Ito peonies are pretty pricey. But one of the big complaints with peonies is that they don't flower for a super long time for us here in the South. And these Ito peonies really do put on an incredible, incredible display. So that's one that I'm excited. But there are other ones. The other ones we have in the sale are all herbaceous peonies. Pecher, Pechet, maybe it's French, I don't know. But it's a nice white one. We have this gorgeous one, Lemon Chiffon. Celebrity, ooh, I like that one a lot. And I tend to like the more single flowered ones and semi doubles like Lemon Chiffon, but that Celebrity is just so good. And these are all easy. People have asked me what do I do to keep them from flopping? I don't do anything to keep them from flopping other than plant other things around them. I plant other plants near them that are a little bit sturdier and stockier earlier in the spring, and they do just fine. If we get a heavy rain, sometimes they'll flop over. But if we're going to get a really heavy rain and I have a bunch of flowers that are really open, often I'll go out and I'll cut stems, because peonies make great cut flowers as well as being beautiful and deer resistant. Probably maybe the best deal at all in the plant sale is Festiva Maxima. This is a super old one from the 1700s. It's this white double with the interior petals often are kind of fringed. There's often some red in there as well, specks or flecks of red. Can't see it in this picture, but it's often there. And we had a bunch of these that we were able to price very, very cheaply, which was exciting. The others are in more limited numbers, but we do have a bunch of them. And the herbaceous peonies are easy. You plant them. They want sun. They'll take some afternoon shade, but really they want sun. They grow up beautiful plants. They flower in the spring. Most of our herbaceous peonies have not started flowering yet. Some of the species peonies have started, but most of these have not. But they will be going soon. And then after they finish flowering, it's just this nice green, looks almost like a shrub in the landscape. Little dark green foliage, and then end of the season when the foliage starts looking bad, you just cut it off and it'll come back next year. And you can find these there'll be a house where a house used to be and it's gone, and you'll drive by and you might see some forsythia that are still alive, some daffodils that are popping up, and some old peonies that are still growing. that tough. Now I know of a lot of our longtime members, supporters have a lot of shade. So I did highlight some shade plants, and there are a lot of them that we have in here, and we do that on purpose. We really, look for some of the shade plants that we think people will like, that will grow well for them. One, people have asked me what plants that are in my garden. I was going to actually do a slide. I don't think I left it in there, but plants that are in my garden. This is one that actually came from my garden. I took a bunch of cuttings. I planted it last spring. By midsummer, it had become a big enough plant that I took a bunch of cuttings and brought them in, and that's what we have here. And it's Camanthus face japonica, Ginsanto nakafu. I didn't look up what that meant. Sorry about that. But the genus used to be Leucoseptrum. So you may know it as Leucoseptrum japonicum. It has green leaves that are with the center of this silvery blue and often with a little bit of a white margin between the two. It grows in the shade. Deer have never touched my plant. It's known as Japanese mint shrub sometimes, but it's one, not a shrub. It's a dieback perennial. And two, it's really not minty, but the deer tend to leave it alone. Anyway, flowers are not very showy. They're kind of this yellow bottle brushy thing, but really not showy at all. But it doesn't spread like a mint, so you don't have to be worried about that. It slowly spreads into a nice clump. And here you can see it in my garden in the shade with an Akuba. We don't have this Akuba in the sale, but I just think they look great together. It's just a really, really easy plant. And it actually wound up, I planted it in a spot that was much sunnier than I thought it would be. So it wound up being a little bit more in the sun than I thought it would, but still performs actually remarkably well in a spot that's really gets pretty intense afternoon shade. I mean, intense afternoon sun, not shade, but it really is a shade lover. We have several rhododendron and deciduous azaleas in there. These are all the ones we have are ones that can and should do pretty well for us. The deciduous rhododendron, we have, I think, 3 in the sale. The one that I really like is this Northern Highlight. It is so fragrant. And, I have these different lists. I put this in Shade Lovers, but I could have put it in one that's for the birds because hummingbirds love the flowers on these deciduous azaleas. And most of them are hybrids. Well, they're hybrids with our native deciduous azaleas. I could have put them on our native list as well. Could have put them kind of in any of these spots. But they're gorgeous plants, and I wouldn't garden without deciduous azaleas. I didn't put the evergreen azaleas, the yak type azaleas in this talk, just because we didn't have a whole lot left, and I wasn't sure if we'd have any left by the time I gave this talk. I looked just before we came out, and it looks like we do have a handful of many of those still. Podophyllums. Okay, now neither of these are in the sale. These are both from my garden, but we do have some that are similar. Show you a few things here. First, I had stopped on the. Are we good, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
I had stopped on the. Actually, move just a little bit over, Chris, so I'm not dropping soil on my computer. On Podophyllum. This is Podophyllum spotty dotty, and these things are hard to come by. You won't find them in your local big box store. Hopefully someday you will. But I bought spotty dotty several years ago and paid a lot of money, more than what we're selling for, and it was one spindly leaf. I just grabbed one that we had in the back. They are all like this. They're really nice, full plants. And as they get older, the leaves will get bigger and bigger. You get better and better color on them as well, where they'll be speckled with red and beautiful. They look like something out of like a seabed or something, like these, like sea stars or something. When they get big enough, you'll get these leaves coming up in pairs, and there'll be a flower cluster under the leaves that's really beautiful if you get down and look at it. Neat plants, great for shade. I can't say enough good things about it. And we have another podophyllum. This is Podophyllum pleanthum. And same thing. Now, you may look at this and say, that looks vaguely familiar. We have a native podophyllum, Podophyllum peltatum. Peltate means the leaf stem comes right up in the middle of the leaf rather than on a side. So like an umbrella, so peltate. Our native one is beautiful. It's in the woodlands. You have big patches of it. It gets a white flower that forms a red fruit underneath it. But the problem with our native, well, I won't say problem. One of its peculiarities, how it works is it comes up in the spring. It looks beautiful. I saw it while I was out hiking recently, but it goes dormant very early. So it will disappear, and where you had it, growing, you might not have anything there. This, the Podophyllum pleanthum, is a season-long performer. It will look good to the end of the season. And as it gets older and bigger and happier, the stems can get taller, so you can get individual stems. I've seen them 3 feet tall. I've grown it where the leaf was easily 20 inches across, and the texture is like green pleather that's been cut with pinking shears or something around the edges, so you get these little eyelashes almost around the edges. And the other one, the spotty dotty, I was talking about how the flower forms where it has 2 leaves, once they get mature enough to have 2 leaves. These flowers will open up. It'll be interesting to see the color because I've collected this in the wild and I've grown them, and I've seen everything from pale pink to really deep, deep burgundy. And usually they're a nice red burgundy that will form right here under these leaves. And our native one just has one big flower. These will have several that hang down. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at least flowers that are going to open on this. And then it can form a big fruit down there as well. Over time, it will spread to form colonies. Here's a little secret for these. They can be propagated by root cuttings, which means you can come in and take roots and make cuttings and grow them out like that. But what you can also do, you buy this plant, you plant it, let it grow all season, really get established. And then next year at some point in the spring or summer, go around it and just cut in with a shovel around it a little bit. And where you sever those roots, often the next year or even later that year, you'll get new plants coming up. Our native apple spreads pretty quickly. This one does not. It stays as a clump. But so if you do that, you can get more plants quicker. So kind of a cool thing. Don't go anywhere, Chris. I mentioned a little bit earlier, I mentioned the geranium. This is the one that's really good for shade. This is Geranium phaeum, Phaeum, I think. Sometimes called the morning widow because it's got a smaller dark flower. This is one called Margaret Wilson that's got a really nice variegated leaf. I really like these plants. These have pretty small tops, but they really like it to get warm before they get going. They have a really nice root system. So we feel really good about these plants. And like I said, we have a bunch of different geraniums, mostly because I love them so much. Here's one more we have. This one's more one that really does want sun. I said a lot of them like some shade. No, I'm sorry. This is one that sun to part shade. This is Pink Delight. And you can see without a flower, it's just great foliage. This is a tighter growing one. This isn't one of the ones that will really weave around your garden. And one of the ones we're selling called White Nights, Geranium renardii White Nights. That stays really very tight and has a kind of a rugose leaf. And that one's actually good for rock gardens. This is Pink Delight. All right, I'm going to show, I think, one more thing. Oh, maybe 2 more. So I mentioned the deciduous azaleas. Here, how about this, Chris? Does that work better? The deciduous azaleas. This is that northern highlights that I showed with the really beautiful white with yellow flowers and those nice tubular, super fragrant flowers. This is what we're selling. I can't remember the prices, but man, it's a good price for this size plant. And all of our plants in the descriptions, you can look at them and it tells you what size pot they're in. And that can give you a sense of the size of the plant. But all of these great big terminal buds are going to be flowers. So in a couple of weeks, this thing is just going to be loaded with those flowers. They're going to be hummingbird magnets. The flowers will finish up, the little leaf out, beautiful little plant for shade. You can really grow them in full sun, but I just I think they're beautiful because they really, as young plants, tend to grow up like this, and as they get older, they kind of arch out and get wider. But when they flower, they have all these clusters right on top of these bare stems. It look like they're floating around in the woodland garden. I love these, and every time I see them at local garden centers, which isn't that often, if they ever have a new one, I'm always buying it, and well, it or two of it or three of it, and just sprinkling them through the woodland because I think they're so fantastic that way. And then I'll often grow, a small vine like a early flowering clematis or something through it, or a climbing bleeding heart or something like that that'll flower at a different time of the season, and really extend the flowering show on that. All right. I'm going to get back on my computer, Chris. Wasn't sure how this was going to work. So there's shade tolerant or shade loving, like I put on there, and then there's dry shade tolerant, and that's the place where people have a lot of issues. Is these plants that will grow in our dry woodlands. So one of the first groups that I always tell people is boxwoods. Boxwoods are woodland plants. That's where they like to grow. And I think they look best in some shade. I grow them in pretty dense shade. Daphne, great in dry shade. Alyssum, and we have quite a few of those, great in dry shade. Serenoa, the saw palmetto, that little low palm that you see down deep south. Now, you want to put it in a fairly protected spot, but if you put it in a woodland with high overstory, it will generally do pretty well in this area. The silver foliage one, the cinerea, is more cold hardy than just the plain green one for some reason. And then another one that's kind of iffy, the Zamia pumila, that's the little Florida cycad, and it's marginal here, but if you're a little bit farther east of Raleigh, towards the coast, you probably have even better luck. But I grow Zamia pumila. We can debate the name because depending on your cycad expert, there's only one Zamia in the U.S. or there's three or so. There's probably just one, but we won't get into that now, right? All right. So I mentioned boxwood. Buxus Pure Gold or Golden Dream uh, has a gold edge around each leaf. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it in the shade. I meant to grab one from my woodland this morning and did not. This is from out at the Arboretum. And the problem is you put this out in sun, and the way the sunlight hits those shiny leaves, it's hard to even tell this is variegated, which people who don't like variegated plants would probably say that's a great thing. I would disagree. But when you put this in the woodland, it opens up a little bit. It gets a little more elegant, I think. And you really see that gold edge, and it really draws you in the woodland. It really lights things up. And I think more people need to grow boxwoods as woodland plants and not try and trim them into little meatballs, but let them grow up into a more natural form. Beautiful that way. Ground covers, that's something that everybody needs. I mentioned a couple of these already. There's this brand new boxwood that I hadn't heard of before this that has the sales name of Flattery, very groan inducing. I mentioned the geranium. The ones that are highlighted in green will grow in shade. Some of these are woody plants like spreading Momi fir and the Buxus I mentioned, and there's a juniper spotty spreader. But most of these are herbaceous plants. Some native like Pachysandra procumbens, Some are, we have a fern like lemnophyllum. Some are a little bit taller. Some are a little bit lower and tighter. Some are good flowering plants. There's a really good kind of variety there. And, I think these, whether they're tall, woody spreading plants like this spotty spreader, or more, herbaceous flowering things, I think we need a lot of those to cover ground. This is a picture I took this morning of our flowering lawn, and everybody asks about this. All this is a bunch of creeping perennials. I mean, right now, what you see, the blue is a juga. There's a couple different types. I think this is maybe black scallop, or
This might be chocolate chip.
And I think this is a Metallica crispa. We have some dianthus, phlox. We have dianthus that's just thinking about getting started. We've got some potentilla down here. We've got ice plants that we'll get later in the summer. So there's a lot there. And we have a bunch of plants that can be used for them for a flowering lawn type area. This is one, Pratia celestial spice. Very nice one. Hold on. Chris, can we switch again? Y'all let me know if this is getting you whiplash or anything.
Someone did just ask what was the burgundy in the front of that image of flowering lawn.
Oh, that's what this burgundy is, what in the very front.
Mm-hmm.
That is Lysomachia, a creeping Lysomachia. You probably know creeping jenny, Lysomachia numularia aurea, the golden creeping jenny. This is related to that. I believe this is a Lysomachia congestiflora. But great plant for hanging baskets, but also lawns and things. It takes some shade. All right, stop my sharing. So, okay, got a few things here. We'll talk about these guys right in front of me, Chris. So I mentioned, we have some of these things that are great for flowering lawns or for ground covers. This is Corsican mint, Mentha requinii. And this thing is, it is, well, we had to go through with a knife to cut them apart. So if you order 18, you get the whole flat. But you can see this thing is just flat as can be. It likes sunny, well-drained soil. It spreads like a mint, but since it's this low ground cover thing, that's what you want. And it smells like mint. It is, just like any other mint. So this is something that's really great for, putting in cracks in, stone paths in full sun, things like that. Great for that because when you walk on it, you release that fragrance. The other great thing about it is the deer don't like to eat mints and things like that, but it is really a good one for, you can actually walk on it. Now, another little low one, let's see if I can get it out, is leptonella, sometimes called brass buttons, miniature brass buttons. I don't know exactly why, but that is what they call it. And this looks like something you might try and get out of your lawns or something. It actually looks like something that would want to grow in shade, but actually likes quite a bit of sun and does like some evenly moist soils. So leptonella, I think I have that right. Am I saying that right? I always want to put an extra syllable in there. Yeah, leptonella gruvii. But you can see it doesn't run quite as fast as the Corsican mint, and it wants it a little bit more moist than the Corsican mint. But it's another one that you can put between pavers and things because it will tolerate being stepped on a bit. You can't play polo on it, but it will tolerate a bit of that. One that will tolerate even less foot traffic, but will tolerate some, is this Nurembergia. This is Nurembergia repens white cup. And it has these beautiful little white flowers. We do have a picture of the flower online, but it only grows a couple inches tall and then spreads and has these great flowers on there. There's several different Nurembergias that are grown in gardens. This is actually one of the best ones. It's one of the toughest ones to grow. I've never grown this white form of it, but I'm pretty excited about that. I am trying to convince my wife to let us put in a flowering lawn instead of lawn we have, but have not convinced her yet. But all of these are great for that flowering lawn or for a low ground cover. You have at least one more I want to show over here for ground covering plants. Maybe I'll go ahead and show two while we're doing this. This is a symphytum, grandiflorum variegatum or Hidcoke variegatum. Really, this is one that wants a little bit more shade. This does not grow in sun if it's in a wet soil, but it really wants a little bit of shade. It's gotten a bad reputation as a garden thug because it spreads. I don't think it's a garden thug. I think it's easy to pull where you don't want it. I think it's a garden thug for people who plant it and think they're getting a clumping perennial. It's not. It will spread. And that's fantastic, I think, if that's what you want. So if you have, 3 or 4 foot diameter area that you want to fill up, a few of these will do that. So I think it's a great plant in that sense. And you can see the new growth comes out with the edged with almost white, kind of creamy white. And as it ages, it gets a little bit more yellow. It has little blue flowers, think bluebells. It's kind of, those kinds of flowers, but they're pretty small flowers. I don't really grow it for the flowers. Super cold hardy, heat tolerant, real easy to grow. If it starts to look ugly, just run a lawnmower over it and start it over that way. All right, I'm sure there are a lot of questions in there. I know we have some staff who are answering those, but I'll answer any questions at the end. So, flowers for the birds. I don't plant things specifically for birds personally. That's just because so many plants are good for birds. But if that is more of your thing, I want to point out a couple of these, and some of them we don't have a good example of. But the dogwoods, most dogwoods have great fruit for songbirds. We have a fig, and I'll show you the actual pig. This is you see it's from Afghanistan, called Silver Lyre. There's some thinking that it may be actually a hybrid with the edible fig, and it makes figs, which you can eat, but much better for the birds. Hypericum. So it's real interesting for the ornamental landscape growers and the cut flower growers don't talk to each other. They both breed their own plants and they do their own thing. And every once in a while, one of those plants will cross over. And this Hypericum in the Hyperberries series is a really good landscape plant. It grows, makes a nice sized shrub, 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, loads of yellow flowers over a long season, and then it forms fruit really well. Not all Hypericum do. And so you get coated with these bright red fruits, which the birds they won't eat them first, but they will come by and eat them. Another great one is Rus aromatica. This is a really kind of an improved form of our native sumac, which is great for birds, but I also say for pollinators. When we have our pollen, our honey from our bees analyzed, Rus, that family was a huge part of the honey. It was one of the most, I think maybe the second or third most pollen from Rus was in that honey. So not only is it a great pollinator plant when it flowers, but then when it fruits, the birds love it. Viburnums, great for birds, but also when we think about the birds, we got to think about flowers. We have some great things for especially hummingbirds. I mentioned the rhododendron earlier, but Beschornaria yacoides is I'll show you one of these in a minute, but it looks like an agave, except for it's not vicious. It's got soft foliage. The vines won't run you through or anything like that. Our native erythrina or coral bean, this thing, it's so hard to get a good picture of it because the flower stalks are so long and the flowers are spaced on there, the long tubular red flowers that the hummingbirds love. Same thing with Malva viscus, just a bunch of them. One that's kind of interesting is this Odontonema tubiforme. This is not a hardy plant, except for the plants we have been growing in the area and being hardy for quite a few years, we're told. We haven't tried it out over multiple winters, or especially not a cold winter, but we do think uh, it'll be a fun one to watch. I mentioned this ficus. This is the silver lyre. We've grown this for quite a long time. Did not think it was going to be hardy, and it has been. We grew it in a really dry soil, and it stayed very compact and kind of thin, and wasn't knocking our socks off. We saw it out at Plant Delights Nursery at Juniper Level Botanic Garden. They're growing in a much richer soil, well drained, but richer. And this thing has gotten really large. We're going to be planting a new one in a much better spot and seeing how it does. But it's very, very neat. Our plants have been in a greenhouse, so they're not showing this great silver yet. Sometimes color like that gets affected by the growing conditions, and this is one of those. Of course, budlias are great, especially for pollinators, less so for birds. This malvaviscus. Now, there's a pink malvaviscus out there called Pam per year, which we have distributed multiple times and whatnot. This is a pink one that's definitely distinct from Pam per year, and the hummingbirds love it. It's you can tell it's a hibiscus relative, but the hibiscus flowers never open up. But like all those hibiscus, it sticks its reproductive parts out there for everybody to see. And I'll mention this Pugster series. We had Pugster Blue and it sold out. But the Pugster series are these dwarf compact butterfly bush, but with big, chunky flower panicles. They're really showy. The Erythrina herbaceae I mentioned, again, this is it before it comes, or maybe after it was in flower. The flowers might have been cut off on it, the old flowers. But, it kind of grows up. It puts out these longish branches, and then it's topped with these spaced out long tubular red flowers. And it's just so hard to get a really good picture of it and show quite how showy this thing is. But what I like it, is this is out all by itself. This is going to die back to the ground in winter. You can cut it back after the leaves die. I like planting other things nearby because it'll just grow up, send these shoots up through other plants, up through other shrubs, and you'll get these spikes of red flowers kind of peeking out from, your deciduous rhododendron or other things. I love it. I think it's so cool. Containers. Now, I have two things here for things that are great in containers. Some of the plants we're selling are not real hardy, and we say that in there. We have a couple of variegated agaves, which are not terribly hardy. The aloe, not hardy at all. We have a tree fern, which while I will try to put it outside, it probably will not survive. Yeah, some real true tropical things. But we also have things like I put on this list, the buxus, and really any of the buxus you can put there. Maybe even better than this pure gold would be the unraveled, the weeping form, because they're nice and fairly drought tolerant. So you don't have to worry about watering them every day, which I like. The other thing I put on here are these two trees. We have this dwarf ginkgo, which is great little guy, kind of all the leaves kind of stand up on it, and it gets that great gold fall color, but on a really compact plant. And Zelkova goblin, which is like a dwarf little elm, basically. And I love that. I grow plants. This is not either one of those. This is a dwarf linden at my house. And I love these little dwarf trees in pots. I've had this in the pot for a few years, probably one more year in this pot, and then I'm going to plant it. But I've got another pot that I just planted the plant out of it like this, and I'm going to I haven't decided yet whether the ginkgo or that Zelkova in that pot and grow it like that. It's not really bonsai because I'm not artificially restricting the size, but I kind of treat it like a bonsai for a couple of years and then move it somewhere else. If you've been to Juniper Level Botanic Gardens, you've probably seen Tony's agaves, all of his tropical, non-hardy, subtropical agaves in containers, most of them variegated. I love this, but Tony moves them into a greenhouse and has somebody deal with them in the greenhouse, and bleed for them. I don't want to do that, but I do keep 2 or 3 different agave in containers at my house. And I put them out on my front steps. And it's ones that are not terribly hardy here. My plan is always to just, when the temperatures are going to drop down, it's going to get cold, to pick them up. I've got about 3 different ones and move them just in my garage, just, for a night or 2, and then put them back outside. And generally, I never move them out. I never move them into the garage. I just leave them out, and they've been fine. I did lose one of them this year because it sat too wet. It was such a wet winter. It wasn't the cold, though. It was the wet. I'm still hoping it comes back. But those are great in containers in that way. And then if it grows too big, plant it somewhere permanently. And if it dies, then it dies. No worry. But you've enjoyed it for quite a few years. You can bring them inside if you want. I just don't mess with them that much. Now, kind of along the same line is that Beschorneria that I mentioned. This is it in flower. We have the non-variegated one in flower right now in the Arboretum. It's gorgeous. There are people admiring it earlier, and the hummingbirds love it. But it's quite variegated. It's got this gold down the middle of the leaf. And Beschorneria yuccoides is marginally hardy for us, it's not super reliable, but it's okay. I think the variegated ones, it'll really be a stretch to keep them alive. But if you put it in a container, you don't have to worry about it biting you like agaves because it's nice and soft. You can bring it inside, put it in by a sunny window, or leave it outside and just move it in, now and then when it gets cold. I think it'd be great used that way. I'm going to replace that one agave that died on me this winter. Oh, there you go, Flamingo Glow. Another great one for pots is Rhodohypoxis boreai. Now, this is cold hardy here. It's a little bulb. It will survive our winter temperatures, but it goes dormant during the winter, and it hates winter wet. And I have found it very difficult to grow in the ground. I have succeeded in growing it in the ground, but it's never really thrived for me. But if you put it in a container and don't ever divide it, because they love being crowded, they will just bloom and bloom and bloom their heads off. Now, because of that, we're going to try some of this in the crevice garden and see if it'll grow in the crevice garden. It's got that perfect drainage. It's restricted root zone, so I think it'll do better. But when you grow it in containers, it's great. Now, the one we're selling is this Pintado with this pale flowers. This is a different one. I don't know what the cultivar is. This is a picture I took in Japan, but they're great in containers. So you can grow them outside in a container. They're just fine. They will flower for you. They're great. They're little guys, only 4 to 6 inches tall. And then wintertime, put them somewhere where it's going to be cool and let them go just completely dormant, but not be wet. So, in a garage, something like that. There are bunches and bunches of these. I've seen growers in the UK who have white ones and pink ones and orange ones. And there's some other species too that bring in some other colors, really deep, vibrant pinks, very, pale pinks. And this is something that I'm personally probably maybe going to go off the deep end on and really start collecting these if I can figure out how to really make them thrive like I see in some other places. All right. Now, this is a question I've been asked by a couple people, and some of this is, up to the individual, but they ask, what's your best bang for the buck? And there are a few things in there. We have some trees like this Cladrastis Perkins Pink, the Styrax Marley's Pink Parasol that are big old plants right now. And we're selling them for a really, really cheap price for the size of the plant. They're really good 7-gallon, taller than me, beautiful plants. Same thing, we have 2 different Taxodium, nice big plants that I think are a really great deal. We have some things that are, kind of 3-gallon size that are a really good bargain. This Chamaecyparis lemon yellow, it's a mops, gold thread mops. I'll show you one in a little bit. That I think is a really good bargain for it as well. And this Crimson Doll lilac, which we have not grown here. So it's supposed to be good for in hot areas, it's supposed to be good in the heat. We have not grown it, so we won't vouch for it, but we will plant one. There's some real choice plants that are going because they're small and freshly potted up. They're going pretty cheap, like this Ginkgo biloba Folkert Select that I said I wanted to put into a pot. This Huodendron tibeticum, which is sometimes called an evergreen styrax. It's not really evergreen, or at least the evergreen forms are not very hardy, but it's a beautiful styrax type plant that does hang on to its leaves long into the season. As it ages, it gets the most beautiful bark. Saw that in the wild in 2019 for the first time, and brought a tear to my eye. Same thing with this Stewartia pseudocamellia are great. This pewter form has really nice leaves. And then the peonies, I mentioned the peonies. The really expensive ones like Scrumdiddlyumptious are new to the market, and they're big old huge flowering size plants. And then we have other ones like the Festiva maxima that I mentioned that's flower almost, they range from just becoming flowering size to fully flowering size for cheap, and then some in the middle that are really great that are hard to find anywhere. And I'll mention the viburnum. We have several viburnums. The Shasta double file viburnum is an old form, but it's still great. It's still kind of the standard against other viburnums are judged. And this is still fantastic. We do have a brand new one from NC State called, well, the sales name is Steady Eddie. And actually, I just got my Fine Gardening magazine a day or two ago that I wrote, a plants for the South kind of thing. And I wrote about Steady Eddie in that one. I was gonna bring it out and show you, but I forgot it in my office. There's the Styrax, weeping and pink flowered. The cooler the spring, the more intense the pink. Love that thing. All right, couple more, and then I'll show you some live plants again. So, we know we have a lot of great gardeners who are members who are supporters, and so we have some plants that might test you a little bit. Some things are ones that may be very easy, like this Artemisia molinarii. We've just never grown it before, so I don't know. My guess is it's going to need very, very well rained soil. Like the Lilium nepalense, which, as the name suggests, it grows in cooler areas. And some of these Nepalese and Himalayan lilies are really tough to grow. So, we have some things that are, like I said, the rhodohyboxis can be a little bit difficult, especially if you put it in the ground. We have some things like Schefflera gracilis, which are not fully hardy. Same with the Zamia and the Polygonatum. And the Pleones, we have these. They're not the easiest plant. They're easy to grow as windowsill plants. This Pleone, you can grow this in your windowsill, and it's great. They actually call them windowsill orchids sometimes. I actually grow these in the ground in a protected spot, and though it hasn't been cold for the last few years, they have come back every year. And the Gunneras, we have two different size Gunneras. Gunnera magellanica is a little creeping ground cover for damp areas. And it should grow for us in damp areas, but I've never tried it, so I don't know for sure. And then Gunnera tinctoria. Our description of this starts with, "You're going to kill this." This plant, everybody, I travel with to England or to the Pacific Northwest or wherever, sees this plant and says, "Why aren't we growing that? We should grow that." And the reason why is it doesn't grow for us. It hates our high heat. It gets too cold for it here. But people always want to try it. And, I was ordering plants and I thought, you know what? I've never actually killed this plant myself. I've always been told it doesn't grow. Why am I believing everybody? So we ordered some. Some people have ordered it, despite me saying you're going to kill it. We'll see how it goes, but it's a cool plant. I'll talk about it in just a second. So this picture, this was a picture taken last year. I took a picture of this plant in my garden this morning, but this was a better picture. I planted this in 2019. It's in a protected spot, but it's come back year after year. Actually, last year it flowered, and the fruit never took. It got too cold, and it lost the fruit. But it flowers in the fall, and the fruits form and ripen over the winter. But you can see the bees love those little flowers, and they did pollinate it because I got fruit, just didn't make it. I was really hoping I'd be going to be able to grow seedlings of this. Now, for those of you who don't consider yourself good gardeners, I did put a list here of easy plants. Most of the geraniums, very easy. Dianthus, super easy, and the deer don't eat it. That Camanthus vase for shade that I talked about, super easy. Daylilies, easy. The deer will eat them, eat the flowers, but they're easy to grow. Irises are easy. Peonies are easy. Symphytum, boxwoods, osmanthus. Got a whole bunch of flying dragon, hardy orange, the contorted thing. It's got fragrant flowers, got showy fruit. It's a true 4-season plant. And I'm really surprised that we haven't sold more of those because we have a bunch of them. There's Taxodium, Parodius, the magnolia we have, the holly that's bright gold. It's a gold Nellie Stevens, Chamaecyparis, lemon yellow that I mentioned. All of these are easy plants. I'll get through a few of them, then we'll look at real plants. Parodia persica, this Persian spire. Parodia persica is one of those real collector's plants. People who know plants love this tree. Large shrub. The new growth on a lot of them, including Persian spire, come out with this kind of burgundy edge. The new growth, it'll go all green. They get great fall color. It's one of the best plants for fall color for us. The problem is Parodia persica gets to be super wide and tall over time, but it has great bark, fall color. I mean, it's just such a good plant. So this one, Persian spire, is one that grows narrow and upright. Now, my guess, it's a pretty new plant, but my guess over time, it's gonna get wider. But the old forms kind of grew sideways sometimes and then up. They grow up in the middle, but then they'd also send branches out that went wide. So these at least are going to go at an upward angle, and you could start trimming off some lower ones, but it's not going to take up as much space. And I'm definitely putting this in a kind of a bright woodland spot in my garden. Irises, bearded irises. These are so great. You get flowers on them. I thought I had names on these. I know this is Schoolboy Heart, and this is Navajo Jewel, and this is maybe Titan. A lot of different flowers on there. Love those bearded irises. They're easy. That one is the Japanese iris, which I can't remember which one we have. Did I put a name? I did not put a name on it. I must have skipped over all the irises. Somebody will put a name in the chat, I'm sure. Dennis he knows all the plants. Yeah, thank you, Dennis. But maybe the easiest of them are the Iris siberica. This is Black Joker with these weird, funky colored falls. They go from kind of rust to purple to apricot to yellow on the little beard there, and then the blue uprights and swans in flight. Look at that nice, pure white. So easy. I love iris. And part of the reason I love iris is because you get flowers on them, but then, and this is my garden this morning, you see the spiky things in the front here, and over here on the right side, this spiky thing going up right here. Those are irises that are not in flower. The picture on the right was not taken this morning, I don't think. No, it was not. The one on the left was. But you get that texture, that form when it's not in flower. And I said people who will grow ornamental grasses or something for the upright strappy foliage, and then we say something about some of these irises, they say, oh, they don't bloom long enough for me, so I don't grow them. I'm like, but you're growing other plants without flowers for the same effect. So this, you get that effect plus the flowers. And I should say behind this one, between the cycad here and the iris, this big bushy thing, that is one of those Ito hybrid peonies, not one that's in the sale. This is the one that really made him famous, Bartzella. But that's it after 3 years in the ground from a smaller plant than we're selling. It's going to have easily 100 blooms on it this year. And I think on this picture on the right, all the way on the far right, the little yellow leafed thing with the purple flowers, we had a few of those left in the sale. Tradescantia Sweet Kate. Oh, and I just put this in here. That's the Crimson Doll lilac. That's a picture of the flower. I have a plant here I'll show you when I'm talking about more best bang for the buck. I think that's it. Oh, I put a couple other lists, not going to go through these, but they're on those PDFs that Chris and Arlene can share. We do have some introductions from the Arboretum and from NC State. The ones on the left are Arboretum. The ones on the right are NC State. Oh, let me go back to show that picture of my garden. Oh no, shoot. I took a picture of this same plant this morning, but I had angled it so that there was a picture of this loquat, Eriobatria wooling hardy on there. But yeah, the best bark crepe myrtle in the world, Lagerstroemia faria townhouse on there. An Akuba we named Mr. Wonderful. We've grown it for years in our Japanese garden, but with juniper level, we decided we had to put a name on it. Just a lot of great stuff there. And then I also have a list of native and kind of native plants. So all those lists will be available for you if you want them. I don't know if a link has been shared for them or, okay, great. There should be a link in the chat for those. All right, Chris, we're going to talk about a few more plants. Okay. I'm going to go back to a few of the different things we talked about. Talked about iris and how much I love those for the foliage. You know, when the foliage starts to look back, you just cut it back and new foliage will come. But you can see we're selling plants that are flowering age. They won't all flower, but they are all old enough to flower with these plants. So nice, big, chunky plants. And Tim was kind enough to cut some iris, so you can see the foliage, but also the flowers. And these are not the ones in the sale, but you know, they're so intricate. If you have kids around who are interested at all in plants, to take them in and show them these bearded irises with the beard down the center, the flags, the falls, you know, they're just great. I think we had some technical issues. Interesting thing with irises, this has nothing to do with the sale, but Iris japonica, the walking iris, one that if you got it where you don't want it, it will just kind of take over. If you got it where you don't want something else, like a slope or something, it's great. Does not flower great for us most years, but this year it is flowering its head off. But just there are so many of these great bearded irises. I just think they are cool as all get out. Another cool thing, if you have kids or if you are interested, it's cool enough for me. I don't need to have kids around to do it. If you have a black light and you shine it on these things at night, it glows in different ways, and it's like runways for bees and pollinators. The irises really direct them on how to get in and get things pollinated right. But great big old chunky flowers. Love these things. And a lot of people only buy the reblooming irises. I get that. I understand that. But I kind of like some of these things that flower once and then you appreciate them other times of the year. You appreciate the foliage, whatever, and then you look forward to them coming back into flower. All right. I talked about the variegated agaves and how great they are in containers. Now you can grow these in a protected spot in a milder area in the ground, very well drained soil, but they're great in pots. They're the perfect size. You know, you get a little clay pot and you just drop it right in there and let it grow for a few years. It doesn't mind a small pot. So at some point it'll, outgrow it and you can knock it up to a bigger pot. You can plant in the garden then. But again, I just leave these in containers and just move them inside when it's going to get very cold. Great for that. Mentioned similar looking plant, this Bestionaria flamingo glow. And I bought this as Bestionaria reality in the UK. I think it's the same thing. It looked very similar. Did not survive in the ground for us. But you get this great central medial variegation. This will get big. If you put it in well-drained soil, but give it water and fertilizer, in this season, it will get big and showy. If you keep it alive, move it inside for the winter, because like I said, I think it's going to be tender. Put it back out. Probably by next year or the year after that, you'll get the huge stalks of red stalk with red flowers with greenish tips on it. Really kind of a real showboat of a plant. And it's like,
Hanging over there.
if you think you can see that, well, Chris is going to try and get you a zoom in on our Bestionaria that is in flower. So you can see that's a pretty darn showy flower stalk. And the hummingbirds love it. Okay, another great container plant, or a plant for, seasonal color. This is Stromanthe, Sanguinea tricolor. You see it all over the tropics. I mean, it's super showy. You got these burgundy backs to leaves, variegated leaves. Beautiful plant. Not the least bit hardy for us. It is not going to survive in the ground, but you can plant it in the ground for just to fill some space for the summer and let it die. Or you could dig up a little piece and bring it in. It's real easy to divide. You just get one of these little stalks and bring it in. You could plant it in a pot and bring it inside. Whatever strikes your fancy. People feel obligated to keep the whole plant, so they'll grow it in this pot and they'll move it in and out and they'll say, it's getting too big. Can you take it to Arboretum? And we usually say no. But I don't know why those people don't just take off a little piece of their plant, throw the rest of it in the compost pile, and grow out a new one from it. And this one's an easy one to do, but really showy. I love this. It's great for sprinkling in around other plants, and it doesn't need to flower. It'll look beautiful. Few more things that I mentioned. This is just that ficus silver lyre. I mentioned it's been in a greenhouse for a bit, so it's not quite as silver as it is out in the landscape, but cool little plant. Birds love the fruits, or so I'm told. I have not actually had fruit on any that I've grown here or at my house. Let's see, finish this table, and then I'm going to grab some of those other big ones and bring them over. So I mentioned the Peony Alishan. So Alishan is a mountain in Taiwan. It's where I've done a fair amount of collecting. These Peony Alishan, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 flower stalks on it. Most of the flower stalks are having 2 flowers come out. And this is, it's like a smaller version of a Cattleya, what you'd have on your corsage. That is a showy orchid. Now, they tend to grow in rock crevices up high, and so they don't want to stay too wet. So they need a very well-drained soil. But they also, a really cold winter could knock them out. So what I would recommend for people, if you want to plant it out, do so, put it in well-drained soil, protect the spot, some shade, mulch well with something loose during the winter, like put pine branches over or something. But what I would do is, usually when you order these things, you get like one of these bulbs. This has got so many, and I would take a little piece off and I would bring it inside and I'd put it on a cool windowsill and let it grow there in some well-drained soil. Don't overwater it. It may go completely dormant on you. If it does, if it loses its leaves, just stop watering it pretty much completely. If it keeps its leaves on, you can water a little bit just to keep it going. But then if it's a cool windowsill, where it's all these new houses with their double paned windows, y'all are it's just tough on like Christmas cactuses and windowsill orchids because they want it a little bit cooler. So I have been guilty with some of things like this of cracking the window a little bit. Don't tell my wife. I blame the kids for leaving the lights on for the big electricity bill. I'm joking. But great plants, and these are such chunky plants for the price we're selling them at. If we had these in hand before I set the prices, you probably would have been paying more for them. We're practically giving these things away at the price. Tell you what, I bought one. Okay, I mentioned the Gunnera. Probably everybody who's gone somewhere where there are great big Gunnera tinctoria growing has a picture of them standing under it. These things get massive. 8-foot leaves, big kind of spike of flowers in the middle. They really like a moist soil. So if you can put them kind of on the edge of a pond or a spot where it stays regular moist, that's where they'll get the biggest. I don't know if that'll make them hardier or less hardy here, but we're assuming, since we told people that you're going to kill it, that we probably won't sell all of them. And that was on purpose, because whatever's left over, we're going to plant out in different areas of the Arboretum and see where we kill it the slowest. And who knows? I know somebody who did something with like moist soil, but he planted it in a cooler that was sideways, a styrofoam cooler that was buried, that was sideways. There was a whole long thing to it. I can't remember it all, but it's the kind of plant that people do go to crazy lengths to try and grow. And you'll probably kill it if you buy it from us. But if you don't, think about the Facebook posts you'll have. You'll be able to brag to everybody that you grew Gunnera tinctoria. Thanks, Chris. Couple more. I'm just going to show this. This is one of the hybrid Ito peonies. Some of the ones we have back there have flower buds on them. This one does not, but you can see this, they're not cheap, but you're getting a serious plant. This will have 8, 10, 20 flowers on it next year. Okay, another one that, people are always kind of funny about is verbascum, because, we see the verbascum outgrown along the streets and, along roadsides, sometimes the mullein, and people are like, oh, it's weedy. But these hybrid verbascums are really not. Beautiful foliage plants. And then they'll put up spikes of really showy flowers. This is a yellow one called banana custard, yellow spikes of yellow flowers. And it actually, instead of being weedy, it's more likely for you to lose it if you really let it go to seed well. So what I do is when it flowers, I cut off the flowers once they start fading to make sure that we get them. Now, often when you buy these, they've got one rosette. And what happens is that one rosette flowers and the whole plant dies. These are big chunky plants with 2, 3, 4 different rosettes in there. But, for me, that would never have to flower at all. I think that's beautiful just as it is, but it'll flower with spikes of yellow flowers, about 1-inch yellow flowers and spikes. Not real tall spikes. They're fairly low spikes, but beautiful thing. All right, a couple of the plants that I said, the bang for your buck. One of them is this Chamaecyparis lemon yellow. And this is a plant that Hawks Ridge Nursery, which is one of our state's great wholesale nurseries, received many, many years ago. And the truth is they lost the name on it. They don't know what it is. But it doesn't grow like any of the other threadleaf Chamaecyparis, gold Chamaecyparis that they've had. So they call it lemon yellow. It's not, it's more of a lemon yellow than that dark gold that you get with a lot of other ones. But what they really love about it and rave about with this is that it's much more sun tolerant than some of the old ones like mops and gold thread and those kinds of things. So just a really good plant for year-round color. In short to medium term, 3 to 5 feet tall, a little bit about as wide, maybe not quite as wide if it gets up to 5 feet tall. It'll keep growing. It can get bigger over time. Probably if they put a tag on it, they say it gets 3 foot by 3 foot. That's true in, you know, 3 or 4 years, but it'll get bigger over time, probably. Other one, and this is why you have to look at the pot size and the plant size on our descriptions, because we may have a small plant that's very rare of the same genus selling for the same price as a big plant that's not as rare, or for whatever reason we had it and grew it big, or we could get it. This is that crimson doll lilac, Syringa crimson doll. And like I said, it's supposed to be heat tolerant. We don't know, we haven't grown it, but the new growth is nice, kind of a burgundy tinge to it, real dark stems. Foliage looks good. It's got that smaller foliage like Miss Kim that tends to be much more mildew resistant. I don't know what the parentage on it probably doesn't say on here, but it does not. But so it's the flower buds are red, pink red. Crimson is, it's like blue in horticulture. And then they'll open to pink. This is not going to flower red, despite the name Crimson Doll. It'll be pink, but it should be fragrant, should be very heat tolerant, should be mildew resistant. You'll know as soon as we do as well, because you'll be growing it at the same time as us. But I'm pretty pleased with that. They're beautiful plants, so it's a great deal on those. One more big one. I love, those of you who know me, have listened to me on these midweek programs, know that I love osmanthus, which is why we're selling several different osmanthus in this program. This is one called Jim Porter. Jim Porter was a great plantsman, and he used to, when people came, they'd always see this osmanthus and love it, and he would pull out seedlings of it and pass them around. At some point, a name got put on this clone, and it's out as Jim Porter. It's got these very narrow, spiny, kind of holly-like leaves, but they're not too vicious. It's not like a holly, but they are spiny. Real nice, dense grower. New growth comes out a little bit dark. Very fragrant flowers. The leaves will get larger as the plant matures and grows. The leaves will get 4 or 5 inches long and a little bit wider, but they always stay narrow. It's a very, very distinct plant. You always do know it. So great plant for sun, shade, dry shade, fragrance, just all around really good plant. I love that people are growing this commercially now. And then we do have other osmanthus in the sale, like Osmanthus decorus and Osmanthus delavei, both of which are great plants. Dianthus, people are not buying the dianthus. I do not know why. This one's Georgia peach pie. Makes evergreen kind of ground cover of this really silvery blue foliage. It's just starting to come into flower now. Just like all my dianthus at home, it's getting ready to come into flower. It will flower like crazy. Incredible fragrance, clove scented fragrance. It's great. Deer have never touched my plant. Once it finishes flowering, I shave off the top of it. You can do it like Chris with a lawnmower. You can do it by hand if you want to be a little more gentle. You can do it with edge shears, is actually a great way to do it. And you can take off all the flowers, cut the foliage back a little bit. A lot of times, if people don't touch it at all, it can kind of mound up on itself and kind of get all funky. Then you got to really cut it back hard. But I just cut it pretty hard right after flowering, and that's it for the entire year. And then, it keeps spreading and spreading. So every once in a while, I'll keep it back in bounds. But the fragrance is incredible. I love it. And we've got two. We've got this Georgia peach pie, which is kind of this pale pink with a little bit darker center to it, and really nice blue foliage. We've got another one called yellow something or other. I'm sure Dennis will put it in the chat for you. But it's a different species. than the parentage of most of these. And I've never grown it. It's a yellow one. And so we're a little unsure of how tough and easy it's going to be. But generally, these dianthus are great. Just give them a decently well-drained soil and sun. All right, now I'm either going to have something sweet or die because this is unlabeled. And I can't remember if I asked to bring up. Sometimes we get plants just for fun that we think people will like. This, well, let's see. Yes. If my Irish roll back in my head, call 911, Chris. No, you've probably heard of stevia. You know, this is the new miracle sweetener, which I should say NC State Horticulture is doing great work with stevia. I think they've got 30 plus lines that are getting out into the stevia production. But stevia is, you know, sweeter than sugar. It's being used to make these 0 calorie or low calorie sweeteners. You know, you can get it in one of the color packets, you know, for your coffee, that kind of thing. Get in big. You probably all heard of stevia. Not hardy, but the leaves are sweet-ish. Might be more sweet if it's grown out in more sun and a little bit leaner soil, but they don't taste bad. Yeah, they've definitely got sweetness to them. I don't really know what the flowers do. It looks like it's maybe got flower buds on there, but we just bought this because we thought people would have fun with it. You know, plant it out, have people taste the leaf from it. You know, we used to grow mint at my house, and every evening at dinner time, you go out and you pluck some mint to put in the iced tea for everybody at the dinner table. Every single night we did that. Now you could do that with your stevia as well. Put a little, you know, sweetener in there that way, or make your own sweetener maybe. I'm sure there's a YouTube on how to do that. All right. That is it for the show and tell. I will take back my screen and I will answer questions people might have. All right. 22. Oh, look at that. Dennis is on the ball. Does the JCRA have any Brazilian candle plants? No, sorry. Would morning sun only be okay for the Beschorneria, I think? If that was the question. It really is going to want more sun than that. You might be okay. Morning sun, I'd put it in very, very well-drained soil, but it's a sun-loving plant for sure. Dennis, was there anything that you know for sure you didn't answer? So there's a question on, can you tell me the size of the Buxus unraveled? It's in the 5-gallon pot. It'll grow to 4 feet tall. It'll probably grow taller than 4 feet if you stake it up. It's been staked to about 30 inches right now, but you could stake it higher. Ours in the garden that's been there for quite a long time is probably less than 3 feet tall. We've never staked it, and it's spread to about 4 or 5 feet. But you can you can stake it up higher, and they are currently set to stake higher. What kind of plants do I put around my peonies to help prevent flopping? So I have shrubs that are out there that do that. Like I said, I love the deciduous azaleas. So I use those. I grow a lot of cycads. I grow some real sturdy lilies that don't tend to flop, although every once in a while everything flops. Some of the irises are great. It's some of the tall bearded irises. That foliage gets nice and tall. Going back to the Buxus, the unraveled width, if you stake it up, I think it's going to stay pretty narrow. I would think that probably 2-3 feet. If you don't stake it at all, just let it grow. It'll grow 4 or 5 feet wide. And people are welcome to unmute themselves and talk directly to me and ask a question if they'd like, or you can type it in. If you have a question that was not answered, go ahead and type it in the chat if you'd like, just so that we don't miss it. I wanted to talk about all the plants. There's just so many good things. I will say, so I did count this. This made me count while I was thinking about this last night. I have 26 different peonies in my garden. If you were asking me if I was a peony grower, I'd say no, but I have 26 different ones. I have about 32 different irises. If anybody got the iris tridentata, which we're sold out of now, that species iris, that actually came from my garden. The picture of the iris I showed with the blue pig beside it, that was a little part of my big clump of iris tridentata that I brought in that was potted up. It's such a good plant. Somebody says they love dianthus, but have a big problem with earwigs. They're like a magnet for them. That is interesting. Has not been an issue for me, and I don't really know what you would do about that. Anybody have any solutions for?
It's me, Mark. It's Sally. It seems to come in when I buy them from nurseries. In like in the soil, in the plant, and then I try to get them out. I don't like using controls, so I've just been sort of, a few of them that I've had for a long time don't have a problem, but the ones that I seem to be buying seem to have this problem.
Well, one thing I'll say, and this is a more broad answer, it's not for you specifically, but I find that people are afraid to really unpot their plants. When you get a plant, when I'm planting, I tear that root ball apart. I make sure my plants are watered before I plant. So I got plants, they've been sitting out for a couple of days. I'm going to plant them. I water everything really, really well. Make sure they are pretty much saturated. And then when I unpot them, I break them apart. If I can't with my hands, I get my hori knife or something, and I really cut it open and I pull them apart. And that's a great way to see if you have any problems, like you're bringing in earwigs or something, and you can really shake out quite a bit of that soil when you do that. And I'll say some of these plants that we're selling are freshly potted. They're not going to be super well rooted in, and that's fine. They'll actually really, you can either grow them out in the pot they're in, or I plant them like that. I love planting bare root things. I think they establish so much better that way. But don't be afraid to really get in there and tear stuff up. Somebody's saying they're experiencing a rabbit problem. What plants do I recommend? Oh God, I don't know. Rabbits are insane. I think everybody stayed home, and before, everybody would go out in the morning and go to work or whatever, and you'd scare the rabbits and they'd scurry off. I think everybody stayed at home and the rabbits had free reign and did what rabbits do. They are everywhere. I'm with you. A lot of the deer resistant plants are pretty rabbit resistant as well. The biggest difference is rabbits will sometimes come in and just snip off the tops of a thing or two and leave them, but they're not really eating it. There you go. Dennis, as you saw, get a beagle. I don't know real specific. Most deer resistant things are fairly rabbit resistant. Woodier things, once they get taller, tend to be less of a rabbit problem. Other questions? All right. That was Chris there. All right. Well, thank you all. I have not made my order once this third group of plants dropped on. If you're really sneaky, you can see what we have that I didn't talk about. And that's the things, that I didn't want to be sold out before I got a chance to get in there. I like to give everybody a chance to order before I get in there, Yes. See y'all next week. I think I'm doing next week as well. We'll be talking about choice plants. So I will see y'all next week. Thank you all.